the topic is tackling GDM at its root. To speak on this topic, we have with us none other than Somashekar Patil sir. And as you know, sir needs no introduction with so many years of experience. However, I will just say a few words about sir. Sir is consultant obstetrician and gynecologist from Miraj in Maharashtra. Sir was a gold medalist in his MD exams in the Karnataka University. Sir has so many years of teaching experience. Currently, sir is a lecturer and consultant at the Government Medical College, Miraj and Wellness Hospital. Sir is running a postgraduate institute for CPS DGO for the last 15 years. Sir has given many presentations, presented many papers, and been a faculty at various state, national, and international conferences. Sir's special areas of interest, if you see, is vaginal surgery and high-risk pregnancy. So with this small introduction, I would like to invite sir to give the talk. Welcome, sir.
Good evening. Good evening, SEALD, all the team of SEALD, and all my friends who are now watching me. In this COVID pandemic, now very much used to these webinar discussions and sharing our knowledge. Today we'll be talking on the GDM, but GDM, all of you know, all of you have been facing, the incidence has been increasing, but still the management is undergoing research, and let us see anything more than what we have been already using is metformin and insulin. So anything more than that we can use, or anything else that can be done, today let us discuss about that one. As far as the incidence is concerned, 1 in 6 pregnant women suffer from GDM. That is the highest. It may differ from state to state or from place to place. If we ask the history of diabetes mellitus, whether that was pre-existing or not, nearly 80% of the women get GDM who have, or 90% who have no previous history of GDM. So the incidence is very high. So the previous history of presence of diabetes is not required in almost all of them. Only 8% of them have got history of the previous existing diabetes mellitus. So it means that every 7th pregnant woman with no history of diabetes mellitus is potentially a GDM case. So we have to be on the run, or we have to be on the caution. So our difficulty is that we are unable to diagnose in time is one. Second, whether we can treat it at its root or in the beginning itself, so that the further progress of the GDM will not occur, and even it can be treated with one set of drugs. If we see the duration of the GDM in pregnancy, more the duration of GDM during pregnancy, worse is the outcome. Late onset have a little better outcome because they will have escaped all the effects of the hyperglycemia. So if there is a longer period of hyperglycemia, there are more chances of a poor outcome of the pregnancy. So as high as 80% of the GDM patients may have impaired OGTT right at the first trimester. So this is a very useful information to identify this GDM in an early stage and manage it so that we can reduce the complications of the GDM. So whatever we were taught earlier was to do OGTT at 24 weeks or 28 weeks, that is in the second trimester. But if we see the statistics just now we discussed, we may miss a lot of patients if we don't do in the first trimester and reserve this test for the second trimester. So the present recommendation is to go ahead with the OGTT in the first trimester or almost in the first visit itself. So the dilemma continues. Whether we have to go for an universal screening, both at first and second trimester, our aim should be not only to diagnose, but also we should be able to help in early diagnosis, early management, and reduce the complication. Now, if we see, we have a series of disease like PCOD will be there, the same patient will develop GDM, and later on, the same patient will develop type 2 diabetes mellitus. So there must be some common factor which is linking all these entities together. One of them is a very high preponderance for the genetic inheritance. For example, twin and genetic studies demonstrate familial clustering. Girls born to women with PCOD are also having an increased risk of PCOD. Family history of type 2 diabetes is very high in the patients who develop GDM. Daughters and sisters of the women with PCOD have higher levels of adrenal and ovarian. So in our, especially Asian PCOD has a very high preponderance for the inheritance, as high as up to 60%. So if a sister or mother is having PCOD, so we have to be doubly careful of that patient who is more likely to develop GDM. One more common link between these disorders is they have a similar impact on the placenta, whether it is the PCOD patient who conceives, or a GDM patient, or the patient who is having already a type 2 diabetes mellitus. The effect on placenta is villus immaturity of the placenta, villus necrosis is there, chorioangiosis leading to ischemic changes, and nucleated RBCs. So there is an epidemiological link between these two, that PCOD increases the risk of GDM, and again GDM increases the risk for type 2 diabetes mellitus. So something is operating in common for all these things. So as we saw the statistics, that very high preponderance for the genetic preponderance, the popular saying goes, genes load the gun and lifestyle pulls the trigger. That is why, though there is a lot of inheritance, all of them will not develop GDM because lifestyle is the one which is required to trigger or to pull the trigger. You all know the complications that all occur in a GDM, which is especially not managed well. By managing GDM properly, all of these can be minimized or avoided. For example, polyhydramnios, preeclampsia, and recurrence of the GDM, perinatal mortality, and in the fetus, microsomia, even in the neonatal period, hypoglycemia, hypocalcemia, and hyperbilirubinemia. Now, how this fetal programming occurs in a GDM. So this may help us understand why the diabetes is increasing in our country. This is programmed in utero, or it is one part of the Barker's theory. We know that the fetal origin of the adult diseases. Here we can have two scenarios. One is the overfed scenario. When the mother is overfed, this leads to early beta cell exhaustion because fetal pancreas secretes higher than normal insulin. And this exhaustion leads to an inefficient pancreas. And when in the later type 2 diabetes, when insulin requirement rises, pancreas fails to reciprocate, and hence there is diabetes. The fetus grows up with an exhausted pancreatic beta cells, leading to type 2 diabetes in the later life. Another scenario where there is a underfed. If the mother is underfed, here also the fetal pancreas produces less insulin. An underfed maternal status programs fetal pancreas for insulin underproduction, and such an deformed pancreas will again fail to produce proper amount of insulin in the later life, leading to type 2 diabetes. So already there is a hidden preponderance and the proneness, whereas pregnancy triggers the GDM and that leads to very high incidence. So the classification of the diabetes mellitus by WHO is type 1 and type 2 we know. Somewhere the GDM comes in between and other ones are very less. Now, what is the definition? Glucose intolerance develops during pregnancy or it is recognized during pregnancy. Both these entities are called GDM. And insulin resistance is common to both the GDM and type 2 diabetes mellitus. So if we see, then in these cases, then why don't all pregnant women develop GDM? It is said that pregnancy is programmed in such a way to keep the blood sugar level a little higher than the normal so that the fetus gets good amount of glucose and that supply is not reduced at any time. But this, because of the problems that we just now discussed, it gets exaggerated and that forms the GDM. So which hormones, which I was telling about, the placental hormones, especially the placental lactogen, these are the hyperglycemic hormones. Along with that, there is insulin resistance and placental clearance. This all leads to the increased sugar levels and the formation of the GDM. The pancreas reserves are lower, and women with a history of GDM have up to 60% likelihood of developing GDM in future pregnancy. And the main reason for this high probability is that as the time goes by, functional reserves of the pancreas are reduced. Hence, in a first pregnancy, the patient may develop GDM at a later stage of pregnancy. In a second pregnancy, this may even occur earlier. And as the age goes up, she may become an over diabetic. So as the age advances, the function of the pancreas goes on diminishing. We know that GDM is almost becoming an epidemic, or we call it as an endemic if we restrict to our country. And this is a very serious problem because pre-diabetics and the diabetics affect approximately 6 million births in India alone, of which 90% of them are due to GDM. There is a very high prevalence, almost GDM affects 5 million women each year. And there is a problem in the diagnosis because we obstetricians also have some confusion as to how exactly to diagnose the GDM and at what period of gestation we should do the tests for the GDM. So if we see all this, it becomes very clear that we should diagnose it as early as possible. As early means it is at the first visit or in the first trimester itself, we must go for the test. So we have to take all that is possible to urgently curb this epidemic. So what we can do is to, first thing is to start the universal testing in the first trimester with the 75 milligrams of the glucose challenge. Preventive steps we have to do, which will be coming to the later stage, like lifestyle management. Start the management as early as possible. And we ourselves, the medical fraternity, should be educated regarding the diagnosis and management. And it is very important that the patient participates in the management for a better outcome. So we have to have a patient education program to understand this disease. Insulin resistance, we know, or how the pancreas maintains the euglycemic status. If there is hypoglycemia also, it produces glucagon to produce more sugar. If there is hyperglycemia, it produces more insulin to reduce the sugar. So what is the definition of the insulin resistance? Insulin resistance is defined as a failure of the target organs to respond normally to the action of insulin. It means that insulin is there in the body, but it is not driving the sugar into the tissues as it is supposed to be done. So insulin resistance is a condition in which cells, particularly those of muscle, fat, and liver tissue, display resistance to insulin. They fail to listen to the insulin to accept the sugar into their cells by failing to uptake the glucose and utilize it and convert it into energy. So as I was telling, there is a high proneness by the genetic and the aging, and there are some acquired factors which trigger or which pull the trigger, that is the central obesity, sedentary lifestyle, high fat diet, and medications. So at least the acquired factors we can try to control by changing the lifestyle. So far we know that insulin is only a drug which reduces the sugar, but the further research has shown that insulin plays very important role in LH regulation. Hence, that contributes to the PCOD. And it also, women with the PCOS have decreased sensitivity to circulating insulin irrespective of the weight. So whether it is a lean patient or whether it is an obese patient, both have the insulin resistance. One more finding very important along with this is inositol deficiency. This insulin resistance seems to be driven by the deficiency of the myoinositol and the D-chiroinositol. So it is not only the insulin that is trying to push the sugar into the cells, but it is mediated by the myoinositol and further utilization by the D-chiroinositol, and this is going to form the basis of our today's discussion. Insulin dysfunction disrupts LH and FSH pathways, and that leads to hyperandrogenism and the ovarian dysfunction as well. So the insulin has much more role to play in the body than just managing the sugar. So how to measure this insulin resistance? We all are well versed with the word HOMA, that is homeostasis model of assessment. This is the fasting glucose and insulin measured together, and there is a formula to calculate the HOMA index. There is one more very good test, that is hyperinsulinemic euglycemic clamp. This is the gold standard actually, but it is difficult to perform. There is insulin and glucose are infused steadily at the state when the glucose infusion equals the rate of the glucose disposal rate. So at that point, we come to know how much is the insulin resistance in that particular individual. We know that there is a metabolic syndrome consisting of many diseases together, which we call also as the X syndrome. And their very common factor is the insulin resistance and the atherosclerosis. So insulin resistance will lead to increased triglycerides also, decreased high density cholesterols, and it increases the BP, leading to endothelial dysfunction. And ultimately, all these leads to atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease. So insulin resistance is important throughout the life, causing the syndrome. So as I was telling, this is the metabolic syndrome, fatal or the deadly quartet we call, that is the glucose intolerance, diabetes, dyslipidemia, obesity, and hypertension. Now coming to GDM, how it is related to the levels of the myoinositol and D-chiroinositol in the body. So GDM is it has been found that GDM is a state of MI and DCI deficiency. In GDM, MI levels are 36% lower than in the normal pregnancy, and DCI levels are lower by 50% in the diabetic subject. So it means that somewhere the myoinositol and D-chiroinositol are important in keeping the sugar levels normal, and the deficiency of them leads to the increased sugar, that is the GDM. So the insulin resistance is related to this MI and DCI, and that is related to epimerase activity, and how that all occurs at the cellular level we can see in our next slides. So MI and DCI, if they are given in the 40:1 ratio in GDM, it normalizes insulin signaling and glucose metabolism, and that leads to insulin, the diminished resistance of the insulin, and blood glucose levels are normalized, and this is how the insulin starts functioning normally and the glucose level is maintained. So it means that the action of the myoinositol and D-inositol are dependent on the cell membrane activity. So we have some guidelines from the Ministry of the Family Welfare. that pregnant women the testing should be done at the first antenatal visit with 75 grams of oral glucose. And if it is more than 140, they are managed as the GDM as per the guidelines. If it is less than 140, then we again test at 24 to 28 weeks. And if it goes above 140, again she goes into the management of GDM. And if it remains less than 140, then she is a normal patient. Then we can manage as a normal antenatal. So what are the management principles that we must follow? We all know that there are three or four options that we have. Is the metformin that we use for the management of the GDM. Next is the insulin. And now the newer one, what we are going to discuss is the inositols. And also self-monitoring by the patient is very important. She can have the glucometers with her and she can be taught how and when to do this self-glucose monitoring. Our target should be that she should have a fasting glucose of 90 to 95 or less than 100 and a postprandial about 140. So let us think of options which not only prevent GDM but also they manage. So can we have a drug which reduces the chances of developing GDM, and if it is developed, it manages also without much side effects. So what we currently are using and what are the advantages and disadvantages? So the first or the foremost drug which we are now commonly using is the metformin. It attacks insulin resistance and we have the wide experience in using that. The problems with that is it does not prevent GDM. The development of GDM is going to be there whether we use metformin or not. Because many times we use now metformin in the first trimester, but that doesn't prevent ultimate development of GDM. Cannot manage severe cases. We may have to add insulin to that. And it is not tolerated by all very well. The metformin crosses the placental barrier and there is a fetal risk of the fetal risks are rightly unknown, but this metformin goes to fetus and causes the changes in the fetal pancreas also. Coming to the insulin is very efficacious drug, we know. The only problem is it is injectable. Hypoglycemia is one complication. If it is not managed properly and weight gain can occur, the large for gestational age babies can occur with the insulin and unable to prevent the fetal complications of the GDM and does not tackle the root cause of the GDM. So in 2017 onwards, the inositols are coming into the play and slowly they are gaining popularity. So how these inositols act in a GDM? They both prevent and manage GDM. They attack the root cause of the GDM and lead to favorable fetal and maternal outcome both, whereas insulin is unable to prevent the fetal complications. And it is shown to be superior to the metformin if we go through some studies that we'll be seeing later on. And it is safer than both insulin and metformin. I think the inositols are the safest drugs in the pregnancy because these are the natural contents of our body or of our food. The only shortcomings are the limited experience. We are not yet very widely using these inositols in the management of the GDM. We have the limited investment in the research. Only few companies are doing like SEALD, the investigations in using of the myoinositol in diabetes. And it takes time to show the results like any other drug. So we'll have to wait till then, or whatever the results have come so far, we start and they are encouraging and we can start. So confusion exists in terms of dose and formulation, although the data is straightforward. The dose is high and we tend to use a lower dose. So when we diagnose, first, or those who are at high risk to develop, first we tell them the medical nutrition therapy. So medical nutrition therapy involves the dietary advice and the physical exercises, which forms a separate lecture itself. For monitoring, we use 2 hours postprandial blood sugar level than the fasting. So our aim is to keep it as less than 120. So if it remains at less than 120, we can continue with the physical exercise, that is MNT, and keep monitoring the 2 hours postprandial blood sugar. If it goes more than 120, then oral antidiabetic agents, or if it is still not controlled, we can use insulin. And again, continue to monitor the fasting blood sugar and the PP sugar every third day if it is possible. This is the recommendation from the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare. So inositol is coming up as a very important drug in the management of the diabetes or the GDM, and it is a key drug, and it has got many other roles than just managing the sugar level at the membrane. It is supposed to increase the serotonin, leading to a mood elevation. Cell survival and growth are managed. Osteogenesis also is helped by the myoinositol, increases the calcium in the bone and increases the strength of the bone structure. It increases the insulin sensitivity that we are seeing. It decreases the total LDL, increases HDL. So there is a reduction in the serum triglycerides. In reproduction, the inositol restore normal ovulatory activity, increasing oocyte and egg quality, increasing fertilization rate and sperm. Even in males, myoinositol and the D-chiroinositol are found to increase the sperm motility at the mitochondrial membrane level. So the myoinositol helps in driving the sugar into the cell, whereas the D-chiroinositol helps in converting that sugar into the glycogen and the ADP, that is energy, and whatever the extra glucose is there, it converts into the glycogen and it sends for storing. So myoinositol is very important to drive its inside, and D-chiroinositol is useful in utilizing the glucose which has come into the cell. So this is a very important role at the cellular level. So there have been many studies using the myoinositol and D-chiroinositol in GDM management, and the results are very much encouraging, and just they are coming out. They say 10.6% GDM cases were identified and they were screened, and nearly 133 patients were put in that, and there was a placebo on, and this study has shown that as high as 58% reduction in development of GDM with usage of the MIDCI. So if we start MIDCI much earlier in the pregnancy, we are preventing the development of GDM by more than 50%, and this is a very, very encouraging result. So there are studies again showing the efficacy of the myoinositol and the D-chiroinositol in preventing the GDM. So this is one study wherein the 4 grams of the myoinositol with 400 micrograms of the folic acid were used. And in another group, that is group B, metformin with the folic acid was used. And the result was very fantastic, that there were 220% more decrease in the occurrence of the GDM with the MI, that is myoinositol, compared to metformin. In another study, similar encouraging results were found. Here, only the myoinositol was compared to plain folic acid, that is almost like a placebo. And here also, we could find that 80% incidence of the GDM was reduced in the myoinositol group compared to the no drug usage. So there has been again more studies which the results are very much encouraging. So in another study, the fasting glucose was reduced by 240%, fasting insulin was reduced by 68%, HOMA index was reduced by 74%, and adiponectin levels, which are very much involved in the glucose metabolism, they were very highly affected or improved by the usage of the 4 grams of the myoinositol in the management of the GDM. So the question now comes whether inositols can replace insulin in GDM management. So this was also studied that one group with only myoinositol and another group with the insulin. So this is a very important study. This shows that insulin was requirement in the MI group was reduced by 75% in the MI usage wing, and maternal weight gain was 22% lower with the myoinositol group compared to the insulin. And induction labor rate was very much less in the myoinositol group compared to the insulin group. So myoinositol has got some upper hand even to the classical drug, that is insulin. Now coming to whether we should use both myoinositol and D-carnositol or only myoinositol alone is enough. Both have got a synergistic effect, as I was telling. The MI regulates the cellular glucose uptake, whereas the DCI regulates or the intracellular glucose converting into glycogen and the storage. So DCI, when added to MI, the ratio of 1:40 allows quicker normalization of the glucose metabolism. So the combination is better. As I have told, the inositols are very much or perfectly safe in the pregnancy, even at a higher dose. At 4 milligrams, what we are now advocating have no side effects almost. And if we increase the dose to 12 grams, just to see whether there are side effects, just there were only nausea, flatus, and loose stools. And it can safely increase up to 30 grams also without serious side effects. Even in 30 grams per day, nausea, flatus, and loose stools are not very significant complications. So 4 milligrams, that is required for us, and it's perfectly safe in the pregnancy. So 4 grams means it is difficult to produce and market this drug. So dose, as told, it's very important. If myoinositol so far has not been producing any good results, it is because it has not been being used in its potential full dose, that is 4 grams. And second problem is it has to be used in a proper ratio, that is MI to DCI is 40:1. Third, taste and acceptability are very important. So the pharma companies have to strive hard to make these preparations acceptable. And we cannot give these MI into a tablet form because 4 grams of MI compressed into the tablet will lose its structure and function. So it has to be more effective in the sachet form. So the companies have to produce in sachet form with the proper taste so that it is accepted. So what are the importance or the advantages of this therapy? MI therapy in GDM substantially lowers the complications of the GDM. So whether it is the respiratory distress syndrome in the baby, macrosomia, shoulder dystocia, neonatal hypoglycemia, polyhydramnios, and preterm delivery. Whereas in this aspect, the inositol has an upper hand over the insulin, whereas insulin has not been very effective in reducing these fetal complications. The trials reviewed in this meta-analysis reveal the following points: that MI prevents GDM if initiated right at the start of the pregnancy. So we can practically start myoinositol combination in all those patients who are high risk to develop the GDM. And of course, if they develop GDM, the combination is going to be very much useful in the management. So also in prevention and the management. So the most important reliable studies, they come from the Cochrane laboratory. A similar conclusion is reached even in the Cochrane. It says that it appears that myoinositol shows promise in reducing the risk of the gestational diabetes. So these again support the same view, and the myoinositol has been found to be more useful than just managing the sugar levels. A very new thing which has been found is the MI deficiency results in neural tube defects. So this is a totally a new aspect of the present day. Mothers carrying NTD fetuses have inositol deficiency. So it has been found that the open neural tube defect babies, or the mothers of those babies, they had the deficiency of the inositols in their blood. So the folic acid is not sufficient to prevent all the NTDs, because there is a problem of folic acid metabolism in nearly 30% of the women, so who are unable to metabolize. So inositol deficiency leads to NTD. So even if there is a good amount of folic acid used, it is not sufficient to prevent the NTDs, and even use of myo-inositol, especially in the organogenesis phase, has proved to be useful in reducing the open neural tube defect. So this is an additional information. It is not the subject of our today's discussion. So even we can go through little insulin, but today's is not our subject. So use of insulin in management of GDM is itself a separate lecture. So today we will not go into the details of insulin. They can be short acting, they can be intermediate acting, very much mixed preparations are available, purified insulins are available, recombinant insulins are available. So all depends on our local protocols as to how much we should use and how we have to use the insulins as per the recommendations. So this is again details regarding the insulin usage and its recommendations, which I'm not going to go into the detail today. So all this discussion, what is the summary that we have learned today? GDM is a rising epidemic in India with serious complications to both mother and the fetus. GDM complications are directly linked to the maternal blood sugar level and the period of the hyperglycemia that is there in the pregnancy. That is, more the duration of the sugar, higher sugar level, more the complications. So practically, we have to try to control or diagnose the GDM at early stage and try to maintain the sugar level to the normal throughout the pregnancy. So OGTT with 75 grams is mandatory for all women during the first ANC visit for an early diagnosis. Although we know that insulin resistance is always present, it might not be the root cause of the GDM. So there must be some other cause or acting behind the screen for the development of the GDM. Though we do not know exactly, the metformin is unable to prevent the GDM in high-risk cases. So just usage of metformin will not prevent the GDM. And presently, the inositol show a promise in both treating as well as the preventing the GDM. So I thank the SEALD and its team, and also all the friends and colleagues who have spared their Sunday and been able to attend this particular meeting. So thank you. I hand over the mic to Dr. Kiran.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir, for a wonderful lecture on GDM. I think you covered extensively both why it is a problem and why it is important to manage, as well as the roles of different therapies, including inositol. I would request the doctors to type in the questions to sir. Any questions, doctors? Sir, I have a question.
Yes.
So generally now they say that if you have somebody has got a history of PCOS, and then they can be at a higher risk of developing GDM. In your clinical practice, how far is it true, sir? People with PCOS ending up with GDM?
Both these diseases, PCOD and the diabetes, that is the gestational diabetes, are on the rise. So we see that many of these patients have got infertility, that PCOD patients. We treat them and they end up in the GDM. So this is practically very much evident that both of them are interrelated. And I was telling that there is a genetic basis interlinking both of them, and the insulin resistance is the root cause of both of them. So both we see that PCOD is almost a pandemic and GDM is an endemic in our country.
Thank you, sir. So there's a compliment from Dr. Rani. Thank you, sir, for a nice presentation.
Thank you very much.
So there's a question from Dr. Bhavya. Sir, you spoke about OGTT. So Dr. Bhavya wants to know what is the frequency and timing of OGTT in high-risk cases, sir?
As we now discussed, earlier diagnosis is very important, and the incidence is very high. Almost every 6th or 7th patient is going to develop GDM. So we recommend a universal screening. So we need not have to categorize them as high-risk patients. All the patients who come for the antenatal care at their first visit itself, preferably in the first trimester, it is recommended to conduct a OGTT.
Thank you, sir. Sir, you spoke about OGTT again. The second question is like, how many times during the pregnancy should we do this testing?
So we do OGTT in the first trimester, and if it is less than 140, the 2 hours after 75 grams of glucose, then we repeat it 24 to 28 weeks. So at 24, 28 weeks also, if there is less than 140, then we label her as a normal pregnancy. She doesn't have a GDM. So minimum recommendation is twice in pregnancy. But if she is more than 140 in the first OGTT itself, then her management changes and it goes into the GDM management as per the recommendations.
Thank you, sir. Sir, this hyperemesis seems to be a very common problem in pregnancy, as you agree. So the question is from Dr. Manjula is that in early pregnancy, when there is hyperemesis and we can't give glucose, can we do HbA1c in these kind of patients?
If there is a omitting within half an hour of giving the glucose, we repeat the test. And if there is a difficulty, of course, we do test the HbA1c. And of course, it is very difficult to accurately diagnose on that. We can say that this sugar level maintenance has not been very good in the last 3 months. So HbA1c is definitely helpful, and that will not only help in the management, it will help in prognosticating. So if we do an HbA1c in the first trimester, and if it is very high, suppose if it is 8, 10 or 11, it says that the fetal complications or the maternal complications are going to be more during the pregnancy. And this is a situation wherein we need to review whether to continue the pregnancy or better you control the sugar and then go for the pregnancy.
Thank you, sir. So there's a question from Dr. Sarojini. She sent it to me. How early do we start the inositols and how long do we use inositols?
Yes. Inositols are the drugs which we are using in PCOD, you all know. So we are using in the PCOD. And same thing used to happen even with the metformin. We used to use that drug in the management of PCOD. And those patients who conceive who are on metformin, we continued the metformin in the first trimester of the pregnancy. So here also we can follow the same principles. The earlier, here we can start this myoinositol and D-chironositol in high-risk patients who are likely to develop the GDM than all the patients. And we start as early as possible because they are very safe. We can start the moment we know that they are pregnant. We can start the MI and GCI combination so that those patients who are high risk would have developed GDM, nearly 50% of them we can prevent or we can avoid the development of GDM and its complications.
Thank you, sir. Sir, how important is that self-monitoring of blood glucose? Sir? If somebody is like diagnosed to be GDM, and then we send the lady home, and what is the role played by that self-monitoring of blood glucose, sir, in GDM?
So we all know that it's very it's a normal euglycemic level throughout pregnancy. Even if there are short spans of hyperglycemia, the possibilities of the complications will increase. So to maintain very uniform level, the self-management is going to help. Nowadays, very commercial, good preparations and easy to do kits are available. And we can teach even the patients who are not very highly educated. A sensible patient can learn, and this will help us to know her sugar level at home, because we cannot have a frequent visit every 3 day or 4 day as per the recommendations to the hospital. The patient can manage or try to know her sugar herself. And if there is a communication, especially as it happens now, the telemedicine or the communication on phone, we can try to adjust the management levels of the metformin or the insulin levels at home, so that the sugar level is maintained uniformly. So if the patient can do the blood sugar on her own, it's going to be very much useful in the management of the studies show that self-management groups have a better outcome than those who come for the scheduled visit to the hospital.
Thank you, sir. Any more questions, doctors, to sir?
So hope I have been able to drive the subject in
Definitely,
a required way. So use of myoinositol and D-chironositol is on the rise, and it's very much useful. So
Thank you, sir.
Thank you once again. Thank you, Kumarji, Kiran, Dr. Kiran, all the team, and all my friends and colleagues who attended the webinar.
Sir, on behalf of Shield Healthcare, I would like to thank you for, as usual, I always enjoy your talks. I think it's always wonderful with a lot of experience and practical aspects as well as the clinical evidence which you put. And thank you so much, sir, for sparing your time to give this talk on a very important subject. We hope to have future webinars with you also in various other subjects. Thank you, sir, on behalf of Shield Health. Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.